Hey y'all, I'm Emily. I have loved quilts and talking about them for as long as I can remember, and I'm here to celebrate the tradition of quilting with you. From family heirlooms to thrift store finds, every quilt holds a piece of history and a little piece of a quilter's heart. Join me every other week to get back to your quilting roots. We'll celebrate quilts and the real people who made them, learn a little bit about the history of quilting, and have lots of fun exploring ways to reclaim tradition in a modern world. I'm so glad you're joining me this week here at Patchwork Revival. Well, hello there. It is Emily. This is Patchwork Revival, the quilting podcast where we talk about quilting legacies, how much we love quilting. We learn a little bit here and there about history, different quilting techniques, just kind of chat and talk. I haven't made an episode of Patchwork Revival in about 6 months, and that was not necessarily intentional, but I am back better than ever, ready for 2025. I'm here in a little bit of a different place right now. I'm actually in my sewing studio, so it looks a little bit different on video if you're watching on YouTube. Hopefully it sounds good. I'm trying a new microphone. If there's any issue, we'll figure that out as we move on. But I just wanted to say welcome if you're a new listener. Hello, I'm so glad you're here. Um, Before we get started with anything, a few housekeeping things. I just want to remind you all that subscribing to the show is how the show grows and gets advertised to other people. So if you'll go down, subscribe to the show on your platform of choice, I would love that so much. I would feel so honored if you would also leave me a review. So the more reviews a show has, the more it's going to show up in people's feeds. I'm a news show. Patchwork Revival really started last year in 2024 around February, so almost a year ago, and then took a 6-month hiatus, which we're going to get into. But anyone who leaves a review would be doing me an awesome favor, and I would be so appreciative. The person who has left me a review already has been my wonderful friend, Maria. I recognized her name, and she left such a wonderful review. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Maria, for supporting Patchwork Revival. Let's dive into 2025. So, first off, what have I been up to? My last episode was episode 5, I believe. I can't even remember now. We'll go back and look. But it was released in June or July. I want to say June, but I can't swear to that. So around that time, I was gearing up for the Sweater Weather Sampler of 2024. If you don't know about the Sweater Weather Sampler, it's a project that's a collaboration between myself and 8 other designers. We call ourselves the Nine Patch Quilt Collective. Every year for the last couple years, we've been organizing a sampler quilt where we each offer patterns that are a cohesive kind of autumnal fall design that come together to make this really cool sampler quilt. But more importantly, we try to do it in such a way that really fosters community and gathering together, uniting under this idea and this goal of learning new techniques, making a sampler quilt on a similar timeline, and overall just getting to know each other. It's been such an amazing experience, and I'm so thankful that I got to be a part of this. So last year during Sweater Weather Sampler, July, August, we were kind of gearing up to get our cover quilt made. The way we make our cover quilt is so one person gets fabric. Our fabric was sponsored this year by Art Gallery Fabrics, which was amazing. Thank you, Art Gallery. They sent fabrics to one person. That person took all of our fabric requirements, sent each individual the fabric that they needed to make their cover block. And then we made our cover blocks, sent it back to that person, and they assembled the cover quilt that would then be, kind of showcased to advertise for the sampler. So I was trying to get myself together, get my block made, then, make sure my pattern was written, make sure everything looked good, that I was happy to have it out into the world and all these things. Then I had to order my own fabric because I needed to make my own version of the sampler. Obviously, I'm not going to put these patterns out and then just not participate because it's so fun. And kind of around this time, 4th of July-ish, I remember I started feeling like not so hot. And I thought, okay, I know what's happening here. Went to the doctor and was diagnosed with a baby. So I found out I was pregnant. Um, in the past, whenever I have been pregnant, my sort of default is to just sort of internalize, hibernate, rest, just focus on simple priorities like surviving, sleeping when I can, and those sorts of things. And then obviously, I've been working. I think I've shared on this podcast, but I am a physician. I'm an anesthesiologist by day, and then a quilter in the sort of margins of my life. And this is a passion project for me. This is fun. Quilting is what I love to do to kind of stay safe, stay safe. Well, stay safe. Stay sane, centered. It's my sort of hobby, my community. And so, anyway, that's kind of all this to say, it sort of just fell by the wayside because my body needed rest. I had to go to work. I also have other kids and I have a husband and all these things. So I was just kind of getting by. But sweater weather was happening regardless. So I kind of had to pull myself out of the funk as best I could, be an active participant, and then finish my own personal quilt, which I absolutely love, by the way. I'm so glad that I kind of at times forced myself to make it because I absolutely love my sampler. Anyway, kind of as physiology would have it, I started feeling much better. But I still have taken some time to kind of sit back, get a bird's eye view of everything that's going on with my quilting life, trim the stray threads, tie up some loose ends, and really kind of double down and figure out what are my priorities for this coming year, which is here. It is January 1st, 2025. We're here at the beginning of a year with so much potential in front of us. So I made a few decisions about the podcast and my quote brand. So I just wanted to share a bit. First off, I am 100% leaning into this concept of patchwork revival. Dreamland Quilting was my original, personal quilty account that I started sharing my own makes and quilting adventures back in, I don't know, 2017 or 2018 or something. And I really just wanted a separate account um, where I kind of just lived my second life as a quilter instead of my primary account. I barely posted on it. And a lot of people that I work with, well, I don't know, they just don't really quilt or understand what quilting is. I wanted my own quilting account. I've been following people for a while. I loved the inspiration. I loved seeing what people were doing, finding new designers, new patterns, and things like that. So I made this account. I came up with a name because I was like, well, I put people to sleep for a living for surgery. And I have little kids. So usually if I'm quilting or thinking about quilting, someone is asleep, like having sweet dreams, dreamland. Um, and then I was also making a fair amount of baby quilts for my friends for baby shower gifts and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just came up with Dreamland Quilting and that's what I was doing. So over time, it just evolved because I started making patterns. I've already kind of talked about one of the first patterns I really designed and wrote a pattern for was my Prairie Queen remix quilt. There's an episode on that. I think it's episode 2, if I recall. But
I started, I had a little website and I had a pattern for sale. And then I got swept up in the best way possible with the Nine Patch Quilt Collective and the sweater weather sampler. And bam, I just kind of felt like I had outgrown my little Dreamland Quilting handle account era, whatever you want to call it. Also, as I was forming my kind of quilting community, I realized that I actually know a fair amount about quilting, and I really, really, really like talking about it. I'm not an expert in every single quilting um, technique or aspect of quilt history, but I do know that sharing the history of quilting and what we do know is how we contribute to the legacy of the craft and the art and the skills of quilting. And I think that is so important. So, whatever we have, we share. That's my philosophy on things. Okay. I love learning about these things. I feel somewhat equipped to research as best I can and share with others, which is basically exactly what my grandma, my mama did for me. So, in some ways, by continuing the podcast and by um, leaning into my kind of quilting community that I have virtually and in person, I'm kind of passing her quilting legacy on to other people through my own legacy, if that makes sense. So, anyway, I went ahead and I just totally changed on Instagram. I'm now at Patchwork Revival Studios. So the podcast and my own sort of personal patterns and projects will be up on one singular account. Two accounts is just too much to manage. Like sometimes I just can't even get into one account. So I like two was just too much. There's going to be more cohesiveness, kind of crossover with things. So if you're interested in following along on Instagram with either the podcast or quilting or both, then you can look at Patchwork Revival Studios, and that's where you'll find all things about the Patchwork Revival. So my mama, I'm kind of circling back to passing on our legacy, my legacy in particular, that is part of my grandmother's legacy. Now, my grandmother was a traditional quilter. She liked traditional designs, colors, etc., you know, and I feel like those kinds of things and that style is truly at the root of my quilting journey. I had this really vivid memory of her teaching me how to do patchwork. And I really, really, really want to strive to sort of ignite that love of getting back to basics, back to our roots, back to the tradition of patchwork, sharing patchwork and the skills that we have with other people who love quilting too, and just start a revival, a renewed appreciation for traditions and the stories that we are telling and creating whenever we make a quilt, any kind of quilt, a traditional quilt, a modern quilt, any of these quilts are part of the Patchwork Revival. And I'm really thrilled that you're here as part of it. So that's how Patchwork Revival was born. I've really enjoyed making each and every episode, but I will tell you that making a podcast is labor intensive and it is not free. Um, Software to record, equipment to record, places to record, studio time, all these things just cost money and they cost time and like hours. And I started feeling like there just weren't enough hours in a single day for me to really like dig in and make each episode the best it could be. And then my sort of physical exhaustion over the summer just gave me an excuse to really sit back and gather my vision for the podcast. So here's what I've decided to do. First off, I'm going to seek help with podcast editing so that I can focus on what I really love, and that's creating and researching episodes and then trying to publish consistently for you guys. Because if my audience is here, I want to give you guys what you want. Episodes. Why else would you be following and subscribing and reviewing the podcast? So That's the plan. So this means I really kind of need to figure out a way to fund the podcast. Not necessarily to be turning a profit, more so just to kind of be able to hire a high quality editor, um, get episodes turned around quickly, and make them in such a way that they're clear, concise, and come out to you pretty consistently. I'm striving again this year for every 2 weeks for there to be a new episode. We're going to have a combination of solo shows, shows focusing on different topics or techniques that I'll talk about. I'm going to have guests here and there. We're going to talk about history. I have some kind of intriguing ideas about different historical aspects of quilting that I want to talk about and learn about. And as I do, I'm going to be sharing that with y'all. So that will be the plan for content. As far as figuring out how to fund the podcast, basically just make it kind of pay for itself, because it's a lot of money, honestly, to hire like a professional editor, as it should be. I mean, these are skills that people literally go and get degrees for. It's not like someone's just doing this in their, spare time, who has spare time. I've thought about running ads, and that's something that I might do. You have to be of a certain size and have certain traction for ads to be an option for your podcast. So as we grow, to be honest, that might be something that I do. My goal obviously would be to put them at a time where they really wouldn't be inhibiting your experience. You'd make a tiny amount of money with each download. So it kind of seems like low hanging fruit that would be a little bit foolish not to explore. But we'll see what happens with that. I'm just not sure. The other thing I've thought of doing is starting a Patreon community. I haven't quite like committed to this fully yet, but I kind of thought about having two tiers. One would just be, a minimal fee, I don't know, $3, $4 a month, where you could just pledge to give your support to the podcast. Probably every quarter, send you a sticker or a card or just something saying, hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting Patchwork Revival. Um, those sorts of things. I've also thought about a little bit of a higher tier, maybe for like $8 to $10 a month, where you would basically get access to all of the episodes. They'll be up anyway. If we ever get ads, people who are Patreons of any tier would probably be able to listen ad free, because I think that is the least you can do on a Patreon community. I've also thought about, so I have like 3 or 4 patterns this year that I'm planning on releasing as Patchwork Revival. And so I had thought that the higher tier could maybe have access to all the patterns that are released throughout the year or years, as they are Patreon members of that particular tier. So you'd have access to a quilt pattern library. And then I've also thought about doing some crowdsourced episodes with that higher tier, where we could, as a community, kind of talk about different topics, techniques, tips that you want to hear about or you want to learn about, and you can share in the Patreon community. I think that is sort of what appeals to me the most about Patreon, is that it's more than just like a paid subscription. It's a community-based platform. That being said, of course, it has to be, maintained and engaged with, which I've already kind of complained about Instagram. So I don't know. I'm looking into these kinds of things. We'll kind of see what happens. I'll let you know as we go what's happening with that. Regardless, the Patreon community, if that's kind of what happens, would end up being something that was entirely optional. It would just be for people who had a special interest in financially supporting the podcast. Anybody else ever, we'd still be on Apple Podcasts, we'd still be on Spotify. I'm still going to put stuff up on YouTube. You'll still be able to listen, watch, subscribe, leave reviews, and support the podcast in that way. So, podcast is not going away. It's going to be here. I'm going to keep up with it. I already have the entire year of content planned out. So it's literally just follow through on my part. And I would like to think that I can do that. We'll see how that happens when I have a newborn in a couple of weeks. But I'm sure I'm working really hard to get these episodes out and scheduled ahead of time so that we don't have a big gap. And I hope you really enjoy what we have. That being said, I do want to encourage you to message me or send me an email if you are able to. Message me on Instagram is probably an easier way to let me know what you want to hear about. Is there a topic you want to listen to? Is there a topic you want to hear more about? Is there a topic you want to talk about? Let me know. I'd love to hear. And now that I have shared my vision for the podcast in 2025, I just want to take a minute right now to talk through what this brand new year might mean or look like for all of us as creatives. You might want to buckle up for this because I have strong opinions and I'm not afraid to talk about them. Not in a mean or like judgmental way. It's just who I am. So the first thing I want to address is this idea and this concept of resolutions. Everybody's making them. I don't make them. I don't really believe in them because I feel as though they are a basic, like, linear progression. And once you reach your goal or your resolution, then what? Like, you just stop or what? I'm just not really sure. So for me, that kind of thing, I have that personality where having things really lined out and set as goal-oriented sort of mentality, it becomes something where I become so obsessed with checking off um, like a task or a chore that I just become so focused on like completing that list of chores or tasks. And I don't even enjoy the process. Like, inevitably, this leads to burnout, like classic burnout. Google it. This is how you get there. Trust me, I know. I've been there. Um, and I also think for myself is like, why am I quilting if I don't enjoy it? Like, why would I come spend my free time doing all this if it didn't bring me joy and my heart joy? So I get it. Some people have quilting businesses. Some of us have quilting hobbies. You know, if you're putting food on your table, a lot of times it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Work feels like work. But for those of us who, I think the vast majority of quilters, despite what social media wants you to believe, I think the vast majority of quilters are hobby quilters. We quilt because we love it. We don't like pay the bills with our quilting. Maybe we kind of fund our habit with our quilting. I don't know, but um, in general, for myself, I tend to focus more on practices or rhythms, like cyclical, kind of long-term changes to my life. More so than these like linear progressional kind of checklists or goals. I just don't love the way goals make me act. I don't love the way they make me feel. I inevitably end up failing, and then I just am like, ugh, whatever. So I do like to take this time of year. It's just almost a natural, speaking of like cyclical sort of things, it does feel like a natural time of year to sit back, become introspective, kind of reflect on how did the year go? I mean, debriefing is reasonable in any situation, good, bad, what went well, what could be better, what do I wish I would have done, what do I wish this next year would look like? And so I think figuring that kind of stuff out is totally reasonable and probably productive. So one of my visions for the year is to just be more consistent with how I interact with my hobby. So a lot of times I'll get going really hard, really fast. I'll love it. I'll love all these projects I'm doing. And then I just kind of am like, and I get to doing other things. And then I always start feeling this um, kind of pull, when I'm not creating, I am missing something. And a lot of times it's like this tiny little nagging voice that just gets louder and louder and louder. And then I finally am like, oh, yeah, that's what it is. I haven't sewn in 3 weeks. No wonder I feel crabby or grouchy or just kind of on edge because I have to get this out. I have to get this idea out. I need to kind of go through the ritualistic motions of quilting, cutting, doing things with my hands. I feel like is a very meditative, repetitive process that is really important for me and how I process things that happen in my life. Good, bad, ugly, pretty, all the things. So I'm hoping to be more consistent, just have little pockets of time where I come out to my sewing studio, get a few things done here or there. I have a project going right now where I'm basically just making a really basic half square triangle quilt. It's inspired by a photo that I found of my grandmother and my dad and my aunts and my uncle when they were kids, um, all out under a big tree, like reading and having a picnic on a quilt. And I saw the quilt. It's a black and white photo. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to make that. So I'm putting that together. It's with old, sort of 30s reproduction fabrics, which I had in my stash for about a million years, I think. And I liked them at the time, but then I never used them. And then I was like, what? I don't sew with these. I sew with wovens and yada yada. And so I finally was like, I'm using those for this quilt because it makes sense. Just kind of knowing my grandmother's style, I feel like I could almost imagine what that quilt looks like. So I'm going to make kind of a scrappy, happy half square triangle quilt. I can't wait to show you guys that. And I'm probably going to write up a little tutorial in case anybody wants to make one of their own, but we shall see. So um, that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm hoping that by having something like that, just kind of a background project, if I have 20 minutes where I just need to kind of unwind, decompress a little bit, I'll be able to come out, trim some half square triangles, sew a couple rows of a block together, that kind of thing. So always having a little project on hand that is, I don't want to say mindless because it's still mindful, but I'm not necessarily labeling pieces for a very complex pattern that I have to get done by this or that time, that sort of thing. I'm also trying to really focus in on the joy of quilting. I have focused a lot over the last year of showing myself my process, my work on social media for the last year. And actually, that is kind of important for like getting your face out there, gaining some traction for something like this podcast. Let's get those reviews in, people. But it's kind of tiring. And sometimes it feels like just this extra thing that you have to do. And it's kind of annoying sometimes. And my lighting is not great out here in the studio, or it's wintertime, so it turns dark at 5:30. Um, that sort of thing. So I'm really going to just prioritize focusing on what I like to do, and that is sewing. That is sewing. My birthday is actually in a couple days, and I treated myself to two patterns. They are one is a bag pattern, one is a sewing kit, like a roll up sewing kit pattern. Both of them are from my friend Tamara of Remy Vale Studio. Hey, Tamara, you're amazing, and I love your patterns. I can't wait to make these, and I literally bought them for no purpose other than to make one of each for myself, like just for me. When is the last time you made a project to keep for yourself? I always make projects for birthday gifts or Christmas gifts or baby showers or my children. Funny story, I was making a quilt for my parents for Christmas. I just had this idea. I was like, I know I can execute it. I know I can get it done. I did. It was awesome. I was really happy with it. But as I was working on it, my son comes out to my studio and he was like, Mommy, what are you doing? And I told him I was finishing this quilt for a gift for Christmas. And he looked at me and he said, Oh, well, can you work on mine next? So I was like, well, let's set some realistic expectations. You're not going to get a quilt by Christmas because it's in like 4 days at that time. But, you know, excuse me, sir, you're my child. If you ask me for a quilt, of course I'm going to make you one. And he even saw me kind of fiddling around and designing on my computer. And he showed me, wow, mommy, I like this one. So I already know what I'm going to make him. But point being, I love making things. And a lot of the reason I love it is because I have other people in mind as I'm making it. But it's okay to make stuff for yourself. I really want a hand sewing kit and a kit to like take with me if I need to take my projects on the go. So I'm going to take some time throughout the year to just make things for myself that may or may not show up on social media. And that's okay. That just is what it is. The other thing I've already started doing, it's not really like having anything to do with the new year, but I've really started focusing on the idea of tidiness because I get into these creative whirlwinds where I lose my mind and I just start something, I cut stuff. My offcuts are like a little too small to go in my fabric scrap bins, but I'm too attached to just throw them away. And so they just end up sitting on my tabletop and making a mess, making clutter, and space is at a premium whenever we're quilting. So I've started really trying to be very intentional. If something is on top of my sewing space, what's it doing there? Does it need to be there, or should I put it up? And I think just by doing these little like micro exercises at the end of a sewing session, or even at the beginning, I have been able to sort of avoid the massive cleanup, which more power to you if you can do that. But I'm like, I don't have time to do that. I just worked like 12 days straight. And when I come out here, I want to sew. So I'm not trying to be spending time cleaning and stuff like that. So I'm trying to just keep things tidy, clean as much as I can. And I feel like that's really fostering some of my creativity as well. I think at the end of the day, I just want to encourage you that creativity is valid, it's important, it's healthy. Um, we were made to be beings that create things. Some of us create with Legos or graphics, like graphic design. Some of us bake things. I feel like my job kind of combines a little bit of creativity, but also within some like pretty rigid physiologic kind of guidelines that I can't alter. And so also having a place to create that's low pressure, um, it's just so healthy for me. And I think it's really important. So I am committing to taking that time and to making my creative practice as efficient as it can be, just so that I can maximize the time that I get to spend making something with my hands. I've seen some pretty interesting resolutions online. I don't make resolutions, like I said, but I don't really judge people who do. I've seen people doing no spending challenges, where they're like not going to spend any money all year on fabric or things like that. Okay, cool. Have fun with that. People want to like finish all their whips. I think that's amazing. I'm sitting here by a whole shelf full of whips that I'll probably not finish this year, but maybe I'll get some of them done. Um, some people are like practicing only with thrifted materials or things like that. Some people are writing patterns. Some people are testing patterns. Anyway, I want to hear what you're doing. Do you have any ideas? What's your kind of resolution for this year, or your rhythm, or your word? People kind of do all these different things. But at the end of the day, I hope we're all kind of feeding our creative selves and allowing ourselves time, space, energy to be creative, to quilt, to sew things, because we love quilting here at Patchwork Revival. So anyway, I think that's all I have. I am really glad that I got out here to update you guys and just kind of let you know what's going on in my life in the Patchwork Revival world. Thank you for being here. Remember that you can find us on Instagram at Patchwork Revival Studios. You can also find the podcast on your favorite platform, which obviously you're listening to. If you're there right now, why don't you just go down, click subscribe, leave a review? I would be so thrilled, so honored, and you would just be supporting the podcast. That's it. Thanks, guys, and I'll be sure to see y'all in a couple weeks with a brand new episode of Patchwork Revival. Bye.